Hello and welcome to the Dank Christian Memes podcast. I am your intrepid host, Broclen. I am a moderator for Dank Christian Memes as well as the digital minister. And I'm joined today by NoneTribe. How's it going, NoneTribe?
It's going. Keep my dad in your prayers, folks out there who do that kind of thing. My dog had to retire to Florida because I travel a lot for my work. And he's getting put down today because he's having seizures. So anyways, keep my dad.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, keep my dad in particular in your prayer. He got really close to they became like really good buddies. So anyways, glad to be here. This helps me kind of take my mind off it a little bit. And yeah, glad to be here.
Glad you're here. Yeah, they're members of the family. We got JonesInTheCut here. Sorry, Jones, I'll get you on stage here. But our guest of honor is Let's Recap, or what should we call you? What your identity is in your control.
No, just call me Vicky. That's fine.
Vicky, it is easy enough. So today we're going to be talking about spiritual discernment, and we didn't put a lot of labels on that because we can come at it from a number of different perspectives. So Vicky is going to share a bit about her journey, and we're going to sort of compare notes a little bit on how different our sort of spiritual discernment and response to calling. And as we move on, probably closer to the second half, we'll invite more folks in to sort of share their different perspective and sort of their spiritual discernment and journey. Am I making sense? Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Well, you are the guest, so as long as it sounds good to you, I think we're in. So where do we start? Where do we begin to get to know you?
Sure. Well, I think to kind of put context on what I'll talk about. So I'm a member of the United Church of Christ, and I am what's called a member in discernment. So that means that I have experienced some sort of call, and I'm working within the denomination to figure out whether or not that is to ordained ministry or something else.
And that's something else is a little, and I'm going to be a little tongue in cheek here because I am also in the UCC, and as a person who was, at first pursuing traditional clergy, my discernment was, pretty important. But it seems to me, and you stop me if I'm wrong here, let me know if I'm getting too judgmental, that in our tradition, you're able to discern that you want to be a parish minister of some kind, a military chaplain, or maybe a hospital chaplain. And that's kind of it. I don't know that there's a lot more, imagination outside of that. Has that been your experience, or am I just getting old and cranky on this issue?
Well, you bring up, or you kind of give me space to bring up a good point. Originally, what is now called a member in discernment was called a student in care. So the idea was that you had...
Right, they stopped caring at one point.
Exactly. No, so they changed the language because originally it suggested that you were definitely called to ordained ministry. That was what you were doing. And your church was taking care of you as you specifically went through your program for your Master of Divinity. So you get the student part and you get the in-care part. I'm not sure how many years ago now, but at some point, somewhat recently, they changed that process to the member in discernment in order to make room for calls other than ordained ministry or to the chaplaincy. Another person in my church was going through, it's called the MID process, and discerned that ordained ministry wasn't their call. So if they had been a student in care, they would have, quote unquote, failed the process. But as a member in discernment, they figured out what they were supposed to be doing. So they, completed their discernment process.
Yes, I also completed my discernment process, but I didn't tell anyone. So I just, I refused to fail. I was just here. Well, but I found a calling here at Dank Christian Memes, not just moderating, but also, the life of our community and our fundraisers and various projects and partnerships, that is my call. And that works well for me. And I've discerned that pretty well. And I think we're, getting along pretty well here. But the problem is that, a parish church doesn't necessarily know what to make of a call like that. So I'm not really interested in playing the game of, well, in the eyes of the United Church of Christ, is this an ordainable call? Because it seems sort of after the fact.
Yeah, especially because it's not there's not going to be a UCC church on Reddit, basically, I guess, because part of becoming an ordained minister is finding a call, like a call as in like a church where you are going to be there.
Correct. Like a recognized setting and a recognized community. And there is some presumption of connection between various churches, although, in reality, that doesn't always actually play out. But yes, you are correct that they are, that's sort of what they're looking at. So there's a podcast I listen to, and I think they're really good for nuts and bolts when it comes to digital ministry. But they talk about how in many ways that the church is 10 years behind when it comes to technology. And I think we sort of saw a little bit of a catch up around the pandemic, where suddenly the term digital minister was making sense to people, and people wanted to, have someone on either a volunteer or maybe someone on payroll or a consultant of some kind. So I think we took a little bit of a jump forward because we had to. So I wonder what a sort of ordainable call will look like in another 10, maybe 20 years in the church.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense? First of all, do you have any sense of, what trends are happening in ministry, and do you fit into those trends? Are you someone who's going for a settled parish ministry or interim? How do you, at this point in your discernment, because, you don't have to have everything figured out. What do you surmise is your place in the bigger picture?
Yeah. It took me a long time to really accept that I felt called to local church ministry. I kind of had I had a call experience back in like 2013, I think, and started seminary, and then kind of had a crisis of call where I was like, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? I don't know.
Seminary is very expensive. That alone is a crisis to me. But
yeah. the dropping out from seminary at that point was, partially a financial decision. And so I spent the next 7 years. Closer to 5, whatever. The number doesn't matter for this conversation. So spent a while trying to discern if the call experience I'd had wasn't to local church ministry, then what was it to? So that process for me was, okay. Let me back up a second. So the member and discernment process, because it's like a very specific process, you have different sort of committees and people who you're discerning with, who kind of, can help you, can ask the right questions and get you thinking about different things. But I was kind of out on my own trying to figure things out during that time so I kind of kept starting jobs, and then like they wouldn't be a good fit, and so I'd leave, and I didn't necessarily have anybody kind of helping guide my decisions when I was applying for the various different jobs.
Now, are these church positions?
No. So they were all generally kind of helping positions still. So I tried to do, I worked with Goodwill for a little while as a job coach, going out to sites with people who might need some extra help. I tried teaching for a little while, but that program had a lot of issues with it, so that there were a variety of reasons why I left that. And I'm trying to think, I did AmeriCorps for a little while.
So you had a bit of a journey. Like it's not as though, we sort of jokingly use the phrase, dropped out of seminary, but it sounds like your journey had in no particular way slowed down thereafter.
Oh yeah, definitely. It kept going. And I finally sort of forced myself to slow down when I had moved to Atlanta for a job. And I got down there and I loved the city. I'd go back in a heartbeat. But the position was not where I was meant to be. And I moved back to kind of part of the thing was during this time I was also living on and off with my parents. So I moved back in with my parents.
That's always fun, back and forth.
Yeah. I actually recently figured out that I've moved either to or from somewhere. I think it was 19 times in my adult life. That includes.
Oh, that's a lot of moving and shaking.
Oh my God, it's a lot. It's a lot of packing. A lot of packing and unpacking. But to me, that also kind of speaks to the fact that I was always trying to find out what God was calling me to do. So it was, even the moving was part of the discernment process. So I moved back with my parents, and I was really slowed down and kind of took a look at things, and ended up working retail for a little while.
Oh no. I imagine I just take retail to be purgatory. That if you work in retail, that counts against whatever your time in purgatory would have been. If that's not the case, it should be. I should reach out to the Vatican and see if we can take care of that. I'm sorry. Carry on. No,
you're good. Keep it. It's good to have the interruptions. Anyway, it's not just me monologuing the entire time. Anyway, while I was there, I ended up applying for a job at so I'm a member of a UCC church. I ended up applying for a job at a different one. They were looking for an office administrator. And what ended up happening was that position used a lot of the skills that I'd sort of picked up over my time, oddly enough, trying different things. But also really showed me sort of the nuts and bolts of what it looks like to actually be in a church as a paid employee, which obviously is very different than being a minister, but it really opened my eyes to the fact that being a lay leader in a church is very different. Like in a lot of ways, people don't realize.
I would say, especially my time at Harvard Seminary, which is now Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, rolls right off the tongue.
I have so many feelings about them changing their name.
But while I was there, I found that there were probably more lay people in my classes than there were people who were, either pursuing ministry or, already in ministry, pursuing their DMin. That there's a lot of lay folks out there that are, not afraid to spend some money on some seminary courses to, sort of advance what they're doing in the church.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful goal. If that's how you feel called to kind of keep moving forward and keep growing.
I feel like so as I've said before, I have strong feelings about how expensive seminary school is. But, the sort of a la carte option of being able to maybe even auditing classes, if not really taking them for credit, I think it'd be a much better approach than, necessarily committing to a full degree, which is, of course, even more expensive. But, for those of us like myself, yeah, let's go deep into debt. Let's do that.
Well, that's part of the reason. So when I was working at the church, I'd really discovered that kind of the day-to-day really was a good fit for me. I was very surprised, but I loved it. And so I had originally gone to Hartford Seminary. I don't think we overlapped at all, but
we did not. Lucky for you, you didn't have to put up with me yet again.
So what was I going to say? Sorry, lost my train of thought. Oh, so I went back to HeartSem for 2 years, with the plan on, so they have a cooperative Master of Divinity program, and and it's an interesting program, and it's definitely a good fit for some people, where you start your program there, your MDiv there, and then you transfer to another school. And so I originally had gone for the cooperative MDiv. Oh yeah, because Hartford Seminary doesn't offer a Master of Divinity.
They offer a lot of great courses, and they have a great Islamic chaplaincy program, but they do not offer an MDiv, which is just a little sad.
Which is part of the reason why they stopped being called Hartford Seminary.
Yeah, that's all. There's also a bit of a branding issue there.
Yeah. So I had switched over to pursuing the academic MA in religious studies. So I went back to try to work on that. And then while I was back in school working on that, I really discerned that I really needed to be pursuing a Master of Divinity. And so I ended up, I already knew I was going to have to transfer if I wanted an MDiv. And so I started kind of looking around the country, and I am currently at Christian Theological Seminary, which is a Disciples of Christ seminary in Indianapolis. And it's wonderful. It's, very progressive theology. And yeah.
I've heard some rumors that the Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ may become more officially related. I don't know how true this is, but it seems potentially viable.
Well, they're already in full communion, which means that if you become ordained in one of them, you can automatically serve in the other. Like, you just have to take a polity course. But there's if you're coming from another denomination, it's harder. Basically, there's more of a process. So
I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
And then we'll try to throw it out to others. To sort of get other perspectives. And heads up, Void Boy, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, so prepare yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, you said, you started in a seminary position, planning to sort of pursue ministry, and then you tried other paths before you came back to that. Yeah. And you said you finally found yourself in a place where you looked at the sort of life of the parish minister and said, yes, this fits. Mm-hmm. Before you reached that point, to what extent did you feel like you were trying to fit yourself into a box or meet the standards of others? Or was this really your personal journey where it was really you just trying to figure out what works right for you? Did you feel external pressure, or did all the pressure come from you?
For me, it was the pressure from myself. Absolutely. I know that there are many people who experience outside pressure, but that was not the case for me. But I think that God was really leading me through those experiences. If I had tried to become a minister when I first went to Hartford Seminary, I would have been a terrible minister. Would have probably screwed some people up. But that's very humble to recognize, and I think there's plenty of people who do go straight for it, and maybe aren't top notch right out of seminary. Yeah. So I needed that time to grow, because God never let me really give up on the idea of going back for my degree. So I always had that sort of nagging in the back of my mind. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely a combination. And I'm also the kind of person who, when I put internal pressure on myself, it sometimes feels like it's coming from the outside. So, that's a special anxiety place to be. But I really did feel, pressured that, if I wasn't going to be, like I said before, some sort of parish minister or a chaplain, even either in a military setting or some sort of, hospital setting, that if I wasn't that, then I wasn't valid. And, so I spent, I went to a number of meetings with my, church council, and, I would explain, what I was working on the side, and they weren't discouraging, but they were very smile and nod, that they didn't really understand what I was talking about when I talked about online communities, didn't really know what I meant about, needing to create models of digital ministry that can be viable for different people in different circumstances. It wasn't something they were ready to play ball with. So, like I said, I didn't quit. I just kind of walked away. I think maybe they call it quiet quitting now. I'm not sure. But I walked away, and I've always been the kind of person who's doing experiments on the side. Even though I wasn't at seminary, I was doing a lot of things online, exploring various communities, trying to create and engage with various communities. And of course, I ended up at Dank Christian Memes, which is fantastic, and much like you said, sort of just fits for me. But still, I think if it doesn't relate to that home church setting for people, they struggle. They don't know what to make of it. And I don't like to toot my horn too much, but Dank Christian Memes is a place where we are here 7 days a week. And I think that's something that's valuable, regardless of where you're coming from, whether you just need a laugh or you actually want to feel like you're engaging with your faith, that's something we can do. So I hope, like I said, in the next 10, 20 years that, Christians and Christians who are in church settings sort of see a diversity of call with a more open mind, perhaps. But that's me dreaming. I'm getting high-minded now. I'm sorry.
No, actually, I think that kind of brings up a good point. We had sort of touched on this a little bit, you and I, while we were talking earlier about this idea of call, and what does it mean to be called to something. Within the organized church, there's a very specific, you are called to, local church ministry or chaplaincy or, sort of an official role. But there are so many other things that you can be called to, to me. So there's also there's the two things. There's the one where you're talking about call within the, within an within a church.
Right, the sort of official, by the books definition of a calling, not necessarily the feeling you have in your heart, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think also our culture has really created this space, this narrative where it's do what you love, and you're expected to find your to make your call, or to what am I trying to say? Your call has to be your job. You have to have a yes. Yeah.
That we still equate that earning of money to validity, and it's a little bit ironic in a Christian setting, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because they're they kind of talk about a job versus a vocation, where the vocation is that you're following your call, and I think we really need to talk about the idea that it's okay if a job is just a job, and that if you find something that calls to you, and you do that, outside of what you're doing to get some money, that is just as valid.
And I think that's where the rubber hits the road for a lot of people, and it's hit the road for us in various situations too, where I have to do something to make money. I may have to work retail. I don't know if it'll count against my time in purgatory, but it should, as we've decided. So let's talk a little bit about. Well, I imagine we're going to be talking about call of lay folks, but I don't want to lead the conversation too much. Void Boy, I warned you I was going to pick on you. Now you're our resident artist, and
yes.
and I called you, I think a week or so ago, and asked you to give us a new background for our buddy Christ icon, which you did, and it looks fantastic. If you haven't looked, go check out our new icon. So I don't know to what extent you imagine your artistic skills to be part of your expression of faith, but thank you very much for that one.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting it to happen, but I think that whenever we're trying to, figure out our place and figure out where, we want to belong, I always like to lean into find the things I'm really strong with, and somewhere, some way, that will be useful for
leading with being yourself and your own
Exactly.
skills. Yeah.
Yes. And my upbringing is a little bit weird, because whenever I was like in a place where it was about expression of faith, it was mainly just doing work.
Your context was a little rigid too, right?
Yes. Very, very rigid. It was not really about like, there wasn't a space for like exploring, what works for you, or, taking time to really.
Would you say it was a dogmatic setting? Like that you were expected to adhere to a dogma?
Super, yeah. And if your work wasn't necessarily in line with, building of the congregation, right? If it isn't really something that they could use as a hard skill that number one would make you to spend more time in the church, and number two, it will basically take away from what you're really interested, what you really want to pursue. It was very limiting. And I think that kind of put me on a path of just like not engaging it for a really long time,
Yeah, well, and it's not hard to imagine feeling like that's the way to go. And we appreciate you being on the podcast as our resident artist. And you've actually led a podcast for us. We're going to have to do that again at some point. But thanks for sharing that and giving us our new icon. It's been a while since we freshened up. In fact, it's been 7 years. So thank you. So I believe we've had basically the same icon for the duration of our existence until now. So thank you for this very historic piece of art. I'm sure centuries in the future, we will look back on this moment as critical in time in the transition of Christian art.
I want scholars. Yeah, I want scholars one day to look at this like, oh, this is a really big moment.
Really big moment. This really mattered for reasons. We'll get to the reasons. Jones in the Cut, this is your warning. I'm coming for you too. So be prepared. Don't be shocked. But NoneTribe, you've been a great help to us. You helped me keep things on the rails, especially when I deliberately planned that chaotic moderators Reddit talk. That was fun. Do you feel like you've been empowered to leverage your skills in a faith setting, or do you feel like you've sort of divided those things?
Yes, I could talk entirely too long on this for hours and hours, and I will not do that right now, but perhaps on another occasion. But what I would say is definitely yes. I will say, again, from my faith-based perspective, there's a lot that I find interesting about what we've already discussed, like sort of the formality focus of our guest today, and sort of this formality that is associated with being called, and this process, I guess, that exists within her denomination and that denomination. Nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying that's interesting versus sort of what I guess my experiences have been, both personally and what I've noticed, which is things being far more, for lack of a better term, supernatural, in context, a person feeling called because of a situation or a circumstance or whatever the case may be. And I think there's biblical basis for both of those processes, and frankly, those things go together, right?
Are you saying there's like a little more fluidity when it comes to calling in your tradition?
Well, and I think in my tradition, but also not so much just my tradition. I'm just saying, I guess generally there's a wide spectrum. Period. I guess I mean, if I'm assuming, I'm assuming like a Catholic based, thought process around this is probably very formal. And then it probably moves through a continuum all the way to a person who preaches on the side of the road, that all those things could be thought of.
Is that what memes are? Are memes the preaching on the side of the road on the internet? I'm okay with it. I just need to know.
Yeah. So the thought process of what is the correct way, I think, is sort of an interesting thought process, or I don't know that there is, but just that thought process is sort of interesting. But again, for me personally, and I like the thought process of of what was discussed about, it's not just about necessarily being a chaplain or a minister or whatever, but this thought process that you have a call, even the thought process of art. I was thinking about that the other day. It seems like Christian creatives are kind of tame in a lot of cases. It's a lot of iconography and a lot of text-based.
I mean, there was a lot of nakedness in the Renaissance. I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm talking more contemporarily.
For some of us, that gets us flustered. I'm sorry. I'm clutching my pearls now.
No, just contemporarily it seems like I kind of wonder, like, where's the Christian creatives that are kind of pushing the envelope? But anyways, so calling, right? Like, does anybody feel called to do that? Do they feel empowered? So this conversation goes in a lot of ways. For me personally, I'll say, I have a background in media and public affairs and public relations and marketing and all things communications. And I know that God has called me to assist in my local church in those things. And I have been wholeheartedly disobedient for many years in not doing those things. And I've seen how he has also brought me back to places where he's like, all right, so are you going to do it now? And it's like, yes, I will do it now. I will be obedient, sir, and do what you have clearly told me to do, So there's that piece of it as well. So anyways, I won't belabor the conversation, but those are kind of my first thoughts on the topic.
I'm going to flip this discussion about calling on its head a little bit, but first I want to give Jones in the Cut an opportunity to share, where you feel if there's, intersection between your personal skills and your experience with faith, or if those things have been divided, and if so, are they divided by you or the faith community you participated in?
Hey guys, how's everybody doing?
Sorry I woke you up. Sorry.
No, I was awake the whole time. Yeah, it's interesting, the formality, again, touched on me too. I'm gonna be honest, I really haven't thought about my church experience in a little while. I went through kind of, I think like the first time I took
What if I told you you're currently in a church experience? Did I just blow your mind a little bit?
Yes, you did.
I tricked you.
I'm sorry. I mean, honestly, this is my first foray back into any type of religious community. I would say in about, I'm 36 now, so 18 years, I want to say.
It's been a bit.
Yeah, it's been a bit. Well, again, so now that I'm actually thinking about it and I'm thinking about my church experience, seeing that it ended when I was about 17 or 18 or so, I'm having some feelings about it and reanalyzing things. No, the most interesting thing though, and I remember thinking about the church that I attended when I was a kid, for the first time a couple of years ago, and I remember trying to talk to my mom about it and really not getting any answers. But I was looking up the term, and I guess it's called pastoral nomads, right? It's basically like the same thing as like gypsies, right? Just like nomadic tribes that like travel. And my church was very much like that. We were all part of a church that was, I would say, it wasn't Baptist, but
were they more interested in like spreading the church or like church planting? And is that what you mean by sort of like nomadic?
Yeah, nomadic as in like there wasn't nomadic as in there wasn't it wasn't a static community. Like I said, yeah, it changed and morphed throughout the years. But a lot of us originated from another church, and we all kind of branched off and left that church. And there was a lot of like personal drama and scandal and stuff that was going on there. And I remember our first kind of service that we had by ourselves was in a McDonald's. And but
that's a unique setting.
Yeah. And and I say that it was the only thing I can really think of are gypsies, because there was like we had multiple kind of locations for a church, but and we always had to like move to another one, or the lease didn't work out, or we didn't pay the rent, and now we had to find a new place. But it was also the same thing with like our pastor and her family. They were constantly moving from one location to another, getting a new place, and then they would find a house, and then they would be housing. It wouldn't just be them, but it would be like
busy. Sounds very
it was very busy. Well, because and that's why I think there's a separation there, because as much as I don't really remember kind of the spiritual teachings, what I do remember was that our pastor and her family had been supporting several families over like a decade, whether that was like getting them food, whether that was letting them stay with them while they needed a place to stay, whether that was like watching their kids,
so
there was
like more of a like sort of practicality of service.
Right. A lot of people in our church were we had a lot of like broken families in there, a lot of people who were like in and out of like housing, having places to live and not, people who were moving or lost their jobs. It was always seemed we would pick up people who were falling on hard times, and then they would need money, need a place to stay, they would need some support, they would need someone to watch the kids, and then that was kind of like the work of what they were doing outside of our weekly Sunday services. But yeah, we moved around from Bridgeport to Trumbull to Shelton, and then finally my pastor at church kind of absorbed into another church down in North Carolina. But yeah, it was very
that's that's quite a bit of travel.
Yeah, it was a lot of travel. Like I said, it was very nomadic.
Well, you set me up perfectly, because I'm going to try to transition here. And Vicky, I'm going to bring it back to you. And I'm sorry, I should have introduced Vicky a little more formally. So we talked about the extent to which we've, sort of felt called by communities, or whether or not our calling fits in with a community. I've turned this on its head a little bit. The church that you and I know, Vicky, in Middletown, and I'll say that because almost every state has a Middletown, so that's badly.
Yep.
But I flipped it on its head and asked them if they'd be interested in a partnership with us. That if they'd be interested in having a relationship with Dank Christian memes, nothing, binding or too significant. But there's a number of things like fundraising that we could work together on. So we are waiting to hear back from the moderator. We've talked with the interim minister, but this is now I'm flipping it the other way around. To what extent is it a good idea to call, church, what we might call traditional churches, to interact with, a sort of digital church or digital setting like ourselves? Is that a calling as well, or is that just sort of distracting from their focus?
Oh, I mean,
I got weird with it.
No, I'm trying to decide how much to say, because whatever. I'll just say I'm a member of the church that you were talking about, so they're the ones who are sponsoring. We don't really use the term sponsor, but whatever, kind of walking with me through this journey. So now I want to know who you've talked to and see if I can help that conversation along. But
oh yeah, well, and we could definitely have that conversation hereafter. But rather than the sort of thing where we're saying, well, what people feel called to the kind of ministry we're doing, I like the idea of flipping it and saying, well, here's something we're doing. This is a weird little community we're doing on the side. And is this a community that you think you could have overlap with, think you could have partnership? And I think, one of the places where I think that's easiest to look at is our fundraiser for St. Jude, that we're, working on in a number of ways for this upcoming Lent. But it's just a fundraiser. It's very easy for anyone to jump on board with. And having a diversity of partners means that there's, not too much pressure on any one partner. And I think that's good too, because, every community is in its own place, and can give, from different places.
Well, that kind of brings up another conversation. So there's the individual discernment kind of process, like either, a structured one through a denomination, or the individual just, kind of listening to where God is bringing you. And then there's like in the discernment process of an institution. So I've been involved with at least one church kind of going through sort of a, kind of re-examining the mission, kind of thinking about what do we want our church to stand for? And so I think, bringing partnerships between different groups, I think, is wonderful. I helped run a Get Out the Vote campaign with the local chapter of the NAACP. That was funded by a grant from the UCC. Anyway, so we were able to do more by partnering with them. So do like impact the world much, in a bigger way. But
well, and we both come from these sort of settings that the UCC is known for its partnerships, whether it's federated churches or investing in interfaith or ecumenical seminary settings. So it sounds great to you and I wonder to how many people it's a new concept, though. I know a lot of folks, we talked about this in a previous episodes, some folks are nervous to make new partners. I mentioned that one of our partners is the Satanic Temple of Reddit, which is just a group of mostly atheists who sort of use the Satanist moniker to advance religious freedom agendas. But yeah, some folks, I like to imagine that there's some folks on their side of things that are equally nervous as there are folks on our side who are like, are we okay with this? It's a debate to be had. Oh, Did you want to jump in, Void Boy?
Sure. I mean, it really is interesting how different groups can have totally different approaches, but they ultimately come from the same place. I had a moment where I was very just not friendly towards Christians at all. And that was because I went through a lot of
folks go through a place like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But then when you start to realize, and this is actually when you go through once you leave a group, you start joining other groups. Right. And you start to realize oh my God, this sort of thing happens everywhere. And you start to realize that, things like religious freedoms are such a really good thing, and they are a good thing. I mean, a lot of, if you're looking back in the past, Christian groups were so instrumental in moving things in the civil rights era. Churches were super important for that, to get people organized and get them to, fight for things that matter. Religious freedom is something that matters and matters to everybody. And part of it is, getting everyone together and this big coalition, it's an ultimate good for everyone. Sure, there's going to be disagreement.
Coalition building is important, and it can work. We've seen powerful examples. Yeah,
and it can work. I mean, sure, you can have ideological differences all the time. This happens with Christians all the time. How many sacraments are you supposed to have? Should you follow the Eucharist or not? These, it can get wacky and crazy super quickly amongst Christians. So I don't really see, and yet other Christians can vibe pretty well and work together. I don't see an issue with joining up with Satanists because, ideologically, Christians are always different, no matter where you go.
We're both given to St. Jude's during Lent. If there's anything you're going to do with Satanists, it seems like a pretty wholesome activity. But I don't mean to dismiss the concerns. It is a legitimate subject of discussion, which is why I brought it up, so we can sort of discuss it. But I have to wonder, Vicky, you and I are talking about how our calls fit into or don't fit into our sort of relationship with our denomination. At Dank Christian Means, we get a lot of people that I would call, kind of post-denominational, that their experience of Christianity isn't tied to a church, or at least not to a single church. So, I wonder, if folks that are, a little more separated from denominations like we are, I find it a little funny to how hard we, have to work and make sure we're communicating and taking the right courses and crossing our T's and dotting our I's. Where if you're outside of a, institutional setting, well, I felt called to do this and I did it. And, and I fed some homeless people or like, that there's a sort of, freedom that exists outside of institution that might be a little more pragmatic at the end of the day. Am I being grumpy again about churches? Do I have a point here?
Oh no.
Be a denomination though. Like,
Oh, what's going on?
I'm not sure. I thought I heard someone talking, but it was so quiet I couldn't be sure it happened.
Yes, same.
sorry, can you hear me now?
Barely.
Barely.
Sorry, it's probably my headphones. 1 minute.
Okay, well, let's go back to getting your perspective on that. Sorry, I keep saying guest because I'm like trying to figure out how to say your name.
No.
The name is Vicky. It's much easier.
I had an account and then I couldn't get back into the account, which had a much better name. And so this is a reference to riff tracks. And so it's let's recap our recap. And it's from a short where the my little avatar is from the short. So anyway.
Okay. I like that too. That's nice. So Broclen, did you want to restate that or are you good, Vicky, to answer that?
Let me make sure that I'm answering the question that Broclen had asked. Kind of the difference between working. Wait, I think you're going to have to restate it. I'm sorry, guys.
that you and I are from a more formal church setting, and therefore we try to fit our call into that setting. Do you, like I, suspect that there might be a more sort of liberated call for those Christians who don't have such a close relationship with an institution?
I mean, 100%. I think, as I kind of said in the beginning, the language of student in care versus member in discernment. I mean, there's still, even though the language changed and the intention behind the language change is good, I still hear a lot of people refer to MIDs as students in care because the idea hasn't necessarily caught on. And
it feels wrong to stop caring. I know that they had great intentions with the renaming, but it doesn't feel right.
Well, no, I mean, no, the old version was the one that didn't feel right. That's why they changed them.
No, that's true. The naming, if only we could have gotten in on the naming sooner. We need to get our marketing folks behind this.
Yeah.
So I want to try throwing it to Sentient Gorilla. Are you with us, Sentient? Are you able to chat at the moment?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So I want to ask you about this, right? So we know a little bit about you. We know that you run a community in Star Wars: The Old Republic on the Satil Shan server.
That is correct.
Oh man, I'm getting good. I'm getting to know your plug at this point. So you've managed a community. I've managed some in-game communities, and I think a lot of people really overestimate how fun it is to run a game community. In my experience, it can be really stressful and challenging, especially depending on what you're trying to achieve as a group. Have you ever felt that in running online communities that your spiritual calling is part of it, or do you feel like there's a divide there? What's your experience been?
No, absolutely. I do definitely feel like there has been a calling, or at the very least, that the Spirit is in, that the Spirit of the Lord can present Himself inside of a gaming community. And my testament to that is that I chose one of the leaders of my gaming community that I am also a leader of, but one of my colleagues, one of my contemporaries, I asked him to baptize me in 2021, and he did. And I invited several members of our community to do it. And the other thing that I want to be a testament to is that that gaming community. Forgive me, I've been eating, so there might be a little bit of a
How dare you eat?
gravelly sounding. Maybe have a little bit of a Batman voice right now, but
no, that's good. Let's roll with it. Carry on, Batman.
And so as we were forming this gaming community, it just so happened like we were not like a Christian guild, as you will find in gaming ecosystems. You will find your typical Christian guilds, but we were not a Christian guild, and it just so happened that several members of our very regular players and very regular community leaders just so happen to be Christian. And so
now, are you guys playing on the Republic side, the theoretically light side?
We play both sides. Yeah,
okay.
We spread it around.
I was going to say, if I had to guess, the Star Wars: The Old Republic is an MMO generally based off Star Wars. So if I had to guess which faction I'd find Christians in, I would guess that they'd be hanging out with the light side Jedi. But it's a video game environment, so maybe it's a place where Christians go to be like, you know what? Let's do a little imaginary evil, kind of blow some steam off. I don't know.
Broclen, that's what you do.
Everyone's shocked when I make the evil decision in the game. I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that. It's just a game, folks. And they're like, how could you?
I would also add on to this conversation, not the conversation, but just to add what I was saying. As far as the spirit can find you anywhere you are. God will meet you wherever you are. Even if it's in a video game, and if he feels like that there's a group of people that will, as the word says, iron sharpens iron. If he can find a group of people inside of a video game to help do that for you in your spiritual walk, it's going to happen.
Now, I happen to know this video game well, and I also know it's a BioWare game, and it basically has its own ethics engine. And you could basically make a small sermon off of many of these, decisions that you make that have, life and death outcomes, and you're trying to choose, are you going to make a light side or a dark side choice? It's all in a secular context for the most part, but it's a fun little place to be, and especially if you're a group of Christians. There's a lot to sort of dig into there.
Yeah, I happen to kind of feel like, when it comes to the narrative nature of the game, there is this good versus evil. I have to say, though, when it comes to Star Wars's interpretation of good versus evil, it's very I guess, I don't know if the word is banal, or it's very soft, it's very vanilla.
It can feel a little comic book, Boy Scouts versus dastardly cartoon villain sort of thing.
As believers, we know that what evil looks like in the real world is something that has very real consequences. Whenever I see evil in video games, as far as like the narrative storytelling, I'm not talking about like how people behave, because that's real evil.
That's a different kind of evil, toxicity. We'll get into that in another episode.
Yeah, but there's when I see evil in the Star Wars universe, it's very it's watered down. You don't see what real evil can be. Like the Sith Empire or the dark side or Darth Vader, they don't ever really perpetuate the evil that we know that actually exists in this world and that we see on a daily basis. The evil that we see when we turn on the news.
Well, and it should be stated, because I happen to know the game, it's rated T for teen. So there's only so much evil. It's only so much evil they're going to be able to throw in there.
That's a true story.
All right, so I want to give File a chance to hop in here. I don't know if your sound is working, File.
I'm not sure. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you enough.
Yeah, give us a little bit. It's still pretty low, but give us something.
Well, the name's in Irish, so it's probably hard to pronounce, and it's not a real name. Well, it's not my real name. I was just listening mostly, but I was wondering there, with the talk of denominations, which you would see as like the correct or the original one, or is that still even a thing that's worried about?
Well, I think you'll find that,
Sorry, that was really badly phrased.
No, I saw I was going to come to it because I saw it in the comments too. So I was going to get you there. Thanks for bringing it directly. I think a lot of churches are going to tell you that they're the right brand. I think that, and I kind of want to give them space to think they've got it right. But one of my favorite quotes from the movie Dogma, which is the where Buddy Christ, our icon, comes from, is that no denomination has it 100% right. That we are all communities of people who are all flawed just by virtue of being people. So no one, necessarily has it right. And from that position, and maybe Vicky, you want to refine this a little bit after I throw some word salad out here. I'm always happy to find folks, whether they're Christian or otherwise, who will enter into a partnership, who can find some common ground, and maybe just find some fellowship. So I'm always happy to interact with folks who are looking to interact with others. But I know that there's a lot of folks who their faith experience calls them to be, on their own and doing their own thing. And I try to be respectful of that as well. Vicky, what's your perspective on this question when we think of who's right, if anyone?
Yeah, I like when people will make the point, like, if God agrees with you 100% of the time, then it's, that's not God. That's, your image of God.
You might be worshiping a mirror if God agrees with you 100% of the time.
Yep, exactly.
That's a really good way to put it.
But it was funny. I think it was when you were talking about working with the satanic. I'm sorry, I forget their name already. But
Satanic Temple of Reddit, but they'd be the first to tell you that they're not affiliated with the official Satanic Temple because they have lawyers who will sue if you try to misrepresent them or say anything. So they are just a community of people. They're not, official.
Yeah. Oh no. And I know that they're not, but I would work with a group named that, even, if they're not actually that, before I would work with, honestly, before I would work with a lot of other churches, like other Christian churches, as a queer person, I am very lucky that I grew up in a progressive denomination, but the homophobia that exists, that comes out of so many other traditions, is still so much in the air that, I when I came out, kind of started questioning my own sexual orientation. I did have that thought of, like, can God really love me if I'm bi? And I'm lucky enough that I was surrounded with people who affirmed, yes, like, everybody's a beloved child of God. But I know that's why a lot of people walk away from Christianity.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of Dank Christian Memes has always had a policy against homophobia and bashing LGBTQIA plus folks, or really anyone, to be honest, like being judgmental and harsh to other people is not really what we're here for. We're here for fellowship and hopefully sharing a laugh at the end of the day. But folks are surprised. And some folks come to Dank Christian Memes thinking that this is a cool place to dunk on the LGBTQ community. So this Pride Month, we finally, made it loud and clear what our stance is, that we're open and affirming. And I think part of the issue is that those who are against are so loud, and they have managed to convince a lot of people outside of Christianity and inside of Christianity that everyone believes that way. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of folks that, unlike us, didn't grow up in a tradition. Therefore, they don't know that, there are people out here who don't see you as any farther away from God than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And that's, we see it. If Jacob were here, he'd be able to say a little bit better, but, usually we see nice, great, wholesome folks and good, deep, sometimes a little contentious conversations. But yeah, we do see the haters, and it is real, and it's something we got to work against.
Yeah, I would like to add that part of like that hate, I don't necessarily think really comes from like hating for hating's sake. I've always seen it as a form of expressing power. You know, a really good way for groups to exercise how powerful they are is how much they can bring another group down, right? And that is really upsetting when you see it, you know, because the Christians could definitely benefit from being LGBT affirming, but just they choose not to. Some do. Right?
Well, and I want to throw this out there, and this is where Jacob is great, because when it comes to a lot of this stuff, you know, when in our Reddit mod discussion, we talked about the beat cop mod, and I can be that a number of times for better and for worse. So Jacob frequently balances me out and says, no, this person is genuinely asking. They genuinely have a theological question. Is there an actual theology that is affirming and open to LGBTQ plus people? And there is, and it's very hard at times to separate people who have the genuine theological question from those who are just asking the question to cast doubt. So for someone like me, I have to make sure I'm humbling myself and being open-minded enough to notice when there's an opportunity for a conversation, rather than just, you know, firing bands out of a cannon and calling it a day. But that, you know, I personally feel, and anyone else can jump in here, I know any pro LGBTQ event I've ever been to that had any kind of attendance had some preacher there hating. And I think it's very important for those who are pro LGBTQIA to balance that equation. That if somebody in the body of Christ is being harsh to somebody, then somebody else in the body of Christ should be kind to that person and help mend whatever wounds. And that goes for anybody, not just this particular issue. NoneTribe, you want to put me back on the rails here? How are we doing?
Yeah, so I think Following the A had something. I don't know how to say that. You told me I don't know how to say it, but can you share what your comment was? I think you were making quickly on this topic, or no? No? Okay.
Nope. Seems to have left us.
Carry on, Broclen.
I was just thinking about how, you know, kind of the question of power with the LGBTQ community, you know, in churches. In the UCC, there's the open and affirming process where, and that goes to the, you know, institutions discerning where they need to go. In the UCC, there's, you know, in New England, about half of churches have publicly affirmed or have made the statement that they affirm and welcome the LGBTQ community. Nationwide, it's a little over a third of UCC churches.
And there are also a lot of deserts out there where folks can't find an affirming church, and that's very hard.
Yeah, I heard an interesting story from somebody who was talking about they had tried to plant a church in rural Indiana, and the church failed because it was planted as an ONA church, as an open and affirming church, because like it was an area that really needed that liberal or progressive Christianity, but
some balance to the the equation.
Yeah, but there are people who it's like if they went to that church, even if they weren't queer, like that would put their jobs at risk. So there's
a lot of places where the church you go to really has a lot to say about what kind of opportunities you have and you don't. And yeah, that could be a pretty politicized environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll speak for someone who does not come from a church tradition that is that liberal. You know, it certainly isn't that conservative either. And I think a lot of Black churches are kind of slightly on one side of the aisle of this or the other.
There's a lot more nuance than just those two. Yeah,
there's everything from the clearly gay choir director in the Baptist church, and it's like, okay, well, that guy's gay. So clearly we probably are okay with it, but, you know, at the same time, not really giving voice to it. But anyways, I'll just say that there's so much nuance in the sense of the thought process of pro versus affirmation versus obviously the other side of it. So it's always an interesting conversation. But I guess I always come in the place of I just want everyone to go to church. Yeah, so that's kind of always my that's where I always land on it personally, is I want everyone to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And they'll just have to figure that out for themselves. That's not for me to necessarily boil down. But in the sense of getting back to the sort of the broader topic of discernment and calling, is there another question you had kind of queued up for us, Broclen?
No, I'm actually I haven't been checking the comments, so that's what I'm looking right now. Someone said we Christians are the church. Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Sort of what I was saying about the body of Christ.
Yeah, today's World Communion Sunday, so
Man,
yeah. So the whole point of World Communion Sunday is reminding us that we all are. Christ is the head of the church, and that we are all partaking in this this meal together, and that reminds me that when we talk about that sense of the experience of a call experience. NoneTribe, you kind of brought up how a lot of people, for people, it's this, very spiritual, experience. And I actually consider myself to have had two different moments, but, I had very large moments like that. But sometimes it's, as somebody once told me, sometimes it's just people telling you the same thing over and over. It doesn't necessarily have to look like, God's voice, speaking to you, or, even
a voice from the cloud. Yeah.
Or a burning bush, which
or even
listen, but also grab a fire extinguisher,
which would be awesome, by the way.
Yeah. One of my friends told me her call experience was she was on the treadmill and all of a sudden went, I should be a minister. And another person I know said her call experience was she was in, somebody else identified in her gifts and called her into his office. It was her pastor, and said, forget exactly what she said, kind of like he was like, oh, have you ever been interested in doing this? And she loved reading, and she was like, if I become a pastor, do I get to read all those books? And he was like, yeah. And so that was her experience. And that's, that's why discerning within a community is so important. I do think, obviously, God speaks to us, as individuals, but when you're looking at, like for Broclen, you wouldn't have been able to be a digital minister if somebody else didn't see that potential in you. And other people followed you. That call kind of comes from other people, and affirming what's going on with what's in your heart and what God is trying to say through you.
Yeah, well, and I feel very called and very satisfied in doing my best to answer that call. But when I share this stuff with a settled church minister, I need to share some links. I need to connect some dots, and I got to remember to be patient with folks and patient with myself. Because all that is an ongoing challenge. We are coming up on our time here, but I want to make sure I give everyone an opportunity to sort of share their final thoughts. And this is also your opportunity to plug any projects if you have them. File. Yeah. Are you
we're
with
going
us,
to swing
File?
to him real quick. I just want to make a very quick comment about the active nature of the word. It's not a past. I don't really think it's a past tense word, right? I would imagine, and you've said it, both of you have said it, and probably didn't realize it, that you were saying the word call both as a past tense experience and also as a process that has continued. And so I would say for every Christian, there is some call. I don't know what it will be. It may be to ministry, or it may be to sweep, or to work with the homeless, or whatever. And to your point about group discernment, that's definitely key. But I definitely want to highlight the fact that there is a active, ongoing process of calling that takes place. I even deal with that as the head of AV at my church. I think about whether we're going to do this or whether we're going to do that. And in there are some nuggets that God sort of reveals to me about, yes, you should do. Yes, you should do that. And in that discernment and calling process, it's like, oh, that is why I'm here. That's why I'm here doing this. So anyways, that said, let's go to file in the A to hear your words, and then we're going to go back to you, Vicky.
Sounds like we may have a bad connection.
Oh, man. You're probably going to say something awesome, too, but you sound like a robot.
Throw it in the comments if you can, File.
Yeah, sorry, we can't hear what you have to say, File.
They're in rural Ireland and their connection is bad. Well, thanks for trying. We appreciate it. Maybe next time.
Yeah. NoneTribe, you brought something up that it reminded me that I'd asked permission to share this story from a friend, so I wanted to make sure I made use of that permission that was given to me. Talking about how not everybody knows what their call is. And, I think that on top of this idea that we're supposed to make money from our call, is that we're supposed to have a big call in general. This friend, one of their parents is a pastor and the other is a teacher, both very much, careers that are callings. And, they've kind of expressed how, they're frustrated that they don't see some sort of bigger call there, and they've struggled to kind of figure out what it could be. And I think that with with this idea, like sometimes that can become pressure, like in order to figure out what it is. And I do think as Christians, we have a bit of an edge because in the end, we're always called to share the love of God, whatever that looks like to us and whatever feels right. But, kind of just distinguishing like the sort of general, like we are all called to this one thing, and individual call can kind of become a very overwhelming conversation, and that may make people feel what's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of lost, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I will say I think I've gotten caught up too much on the moment of calling, like you said, NoneTribe, and haven't recognized the sort of continuing process that I first felt my calling when I was 14 years old, making a salad, cutting into a green pepper, and was like, okay, ministry sounds like a good idea for some reason now. And I told a couple of friends, and they sort of embellished the story, like, well, he cut into the pepper, and the blinding light of God came out of the pepper and called him, and it was adorable, but not at all accurate. I've only been with Dank Christian Memes for about a year and a half, so there was a lot of time spent on that process of calling, and I probably won't be here forever. I hope that Dank Christian Memes will continue on after I'm gone. But my calling will likely change at some point. That everything changes eventually. And I think, folks should try to be open to that if they can, and, recognize where institutions and community help. And sometimes where institutions and community might be, making you feel like you're stuck in a box a little bit. Anyway, that's my final thoughts. Those are my final words. Void Boy, did you have anything to share with us?
Well, I guess I kind of noticed that there's like a lot of healing to. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
No, sorry. Just, well, I guess, whenever you have like a calling or something that you always wanted to do, I've always felt that, always use your gut, always see like, where can I be useful, but it always has to, I realized one day, it always has to ring true to you first. Like if it doesn't ring true, then it's, it's not worth doing it. Right. And I've always have these issues when I go back and forth a lot. What am I doing is right or not? But if I look back and I say, I did this because this is true to me, and and I really love, like Broclen said earlier, I'm doing this now, but then it could change, right? Because the truth that I have now I've experienced different things, and now the truth became more elastic. And faith is a very elastic thing. And I totally think that so long as your faith and your truth are meshing together, I think that is where, the calling really starts to make sense. I don't know if I'm making sense, but this is where I'm like trying to match the energy here.
Preaching my sermon. Sounds good to me.
Heck yeah.
All right, Sentient Gorilla. Should I do your plug for you? Sentient Gorilla manages a community, a guild in Knights of the Old Republic, which is a Star Wars-based MMO. I don't know the name of the guild, but they are operating on the Satil Shan server. So if you're going to make a character, make sure you're on that server so you can meet up with Sentient Gorilla. You guys have a name? You guys have a tagline? How should we want to do a little brand marketing with you. What's your group named?
Thank you. Our name is Frontera Enclave, and we are Christian friendly, and we're not the best, we're not the brightest, but dang it, we're having a great time.
I like that.
But I wanted to just real quick, I don't know if I have anything else to add as far as the topic, but I did want to throw up a praise report if I could.
Sure, go for it.
There, about a year and a half ago, there was this mail lady that was very regular at delivering the mail to my apartment building here in New York City where I live. And if you know anything about New York City, you know that even though it's a big city, it can feel a lot like a small town sometimes, especially our individual neighborhoods. And one day I started to notice that my typical mail lady, an older woman, Hispanic lady who is, an old lady, she started not to come around anymore. And so I asked the new mail person, I said, hey, what happened to the old mail lady that used to be here? And I've quickly learned that she was very, very sick, battling an illness. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. Immediately, she was in my heart. And immediately I began to pray, and I've been thinking of her ever since and praying for her. And so as different mail people would come around, I would always make sure to ask, hey, I wanted to check on the old mail lady. I didn't remember her name. I didn't know what her name was, but they knew exactly who I was talking about. And they said, oh, she's still sick. She's still fighting. And this went on for about a year and a half. And then just yesterday, I walked past a mail person, and I thought I recognized them. I turned around and I said, hey, aren't you the mail lady that used to service? I mentioned my address to her. I'm not going to repeat it here. But I mentioned to her, I said, aren't you the mail person that serviced my address? And she goes, oh, yes, I am. I said, I've been thinking about you for so long. They told me you were sick, and I've been praying for you every day. She goes, thank you so much. This is my first day back. I said, I'm so grateful to God that you are okay. Praise God that you're alive, and thank you, God, that you're back. And she says, thank you for your prayers so much. So I just wanted to throw up some praise to God and let everybody know that, there might be some people out there that say to themselves, how, when it comes to spiritual discernment, where do I start? What am I supposed to do? It's really not that hard. There are things that are on our hearts every single day, and you can find the things that God puts on your heart. Pray about those things. That's spiritual discernment to me. Praise God that she's okay.
Yeah,
Amen.
praise God. Amen.
Yeah, man, you brought it home there, Sentient Gorilla. I love it.
And I think you're right. Sometimes we're looking for that big picture thing, but sometimes those little fundamentals. There's never been a time in my life where I couldn't use to put a little more focus into prayer. So yeah, you're right, Sentient. Sometimes it's not the big things. Sometimes it's the little stuff that we gotta pay attention to.
But I know now I feel kind of silly for not have mentioning prayer at all this entire time, I think.
Well, we're working within like about an hour time frame, and we're actually over, so we can't cover everything. But Vicky, it has been great having you, and we would love to have you back sometime.
Awesome.
So I hope you'll consider that.
Yeah.
If we're all good, I think I'm going to read our show notes. Are we all right?
I wanted to ask Vicky if she had any place that we could follow her at. I would love to, if there's anything that she shares, like in social media, that I can like maybe learn some more from her. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, can we find you online, Vicky, or are you internet incognito?
Yeah, a little bit harder to find me online. It's if you want to watch me fumble through my student ministry, seeing how I discern if that's the correct call for me. I'm doing my student ministry at St. Peter's UCC in Carmel, Indiana. So you can look that up, and you'll find our YouTube. And yeah, last week I had my first sermon there. So anyway.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. I get to preach a lot, actually. So.
I have a lot of respect for people who preach in what I call the old style. All my preaching is memes now, so that's a little bit different than it used to be.
It's not a great sermon. Still working on getting there, but it's there.
Well, as long as the Spirit's with you, I'm sure you moved somebody to a slightly better place. All right. Well, I'm going to read our show notes. Thanks again to our guest, Vicky. Thank you to NoneTribe for keeping it on the rails, as well as Void Boy and Sentient Gorilla for rounding out our crew here. This has been the Dank Christian Memes podcast. Our music is provided by Olive Tiger. Our next recording session will be actually next Sunday. So we're going to be each Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern time from here on out. If you would like to... Dank Christian Memes is a place for all kinds of Christians and all kinds of non-Christians to enjoy silly memes together, as well as this podcast. If you'd like to connect with our community further, there's a link to our Discord in the comments section. Thank you to everyone for listening, and until next time, may the memes bless you and keep you.